The galaxy was wide, filled with countless stars, planets, and species. Civilizations older than Earth had stood for thousands of years, building empires, fleets, and armies that could destroy moons. Yet in recent times, a single word began to ripple through the whispers of the Galactic Council: humans. At first, most alien leaders laughed. Earth was a young world, barely stepping into the stars. Their fleets were small, their colonies fewer than most. But the laughter always faded when talk turned to a special kind of human. These humans were called special forces. The phrase was strange to the aliens. It did not sound like a fleet, a warship, or a government title. Yet those who had seen them in action used the word with quiet respect. Among all the rumors, one name stood out: a woman. No one even knew her full story, but every commander who had fought on the same battlefield as her carried the same haunted look when speaking of her. Her name was Captain Mara. She was human, small compared to towering reptilian warriors or armored insectoid soldiers, yet she carried herself as if nothing in the galaxy could make her step back. It began on Valus Prime, a border colony where war had become a constant visitor. The planet was rich in resources and had long been contested by rival factions. On the day the sky darkened with warships, most defenders believed it was their last stand. Civilians crowded in shelters. Alien soldiers clutched their weapons, their antennae twitching with fear. They had faced raiders before, but this was different. This was a coalition of warlords, species that had united not for peace, but for conquest. Their fleets circled the skies, their soldiers dropping in waves. The defenders sent desperate messages for help, but they did not expect anyone to come. Then, a single dropship pierced the clouds. It was not large, not heavily armed. It descended, slowly, ignoring the enemy's mocking fire. The defenders looked up in disbelief. Who would dare land in the middle of such a hopeless battle? When the hatch opened, a human woman stepped out. Mara wore no heavy armor. She carried no oversized weapon that looked like it could level a city. She walked forward with steady boots, her helmet under her arm, her dark hair tied back and her eyes sharp as steel. The alien defenders whispered nervously. Some had fought beside humans before, but never one of them. This was Special Forces. The enemy noticed her too. Across the field, alien commanders sneered. One soldier? They send one soldier? They laughed through their comms, not knowing why the defenders suddenly stood a little straighter, why hope flickered in their eyes. Again, Mara scanned the battlefield, calm and cold. She noticed the broken defenses, the frightened civilians behind barricades, the desperate soldiers holding weapons with trembling claws. She didn't yell or promise miracles. She simply nodded to the commander beside her, a scaled alien officer whose hand still shook. "Show me where they'll strike first," she said. The officer hesitated. You are alone?" "Not alone," Mara replied. She tapped her chest. "You have me." There was no arrogance in her tone. It was simple truth, spoken with quiet confidence. The officer gave her a map. Mara studied it, eyes narrowing. The enemy was preparing a push toward the shelters. If they broke through, thousands of civilians would be lost. She moved to the front lines without hesitation. The defenders followed her almost against their will. Something in her calm presence pulled them forward. It was as if fear itself grew weaker near her. She crouched behind the barricade, adjusted her rifle, and spoke to the nervous squad beside her. "When they come, don't think about how many. Think about the ones beside you. Hold your ground. I'll show you how." The soldiers nodded, their fear slowly hardening into determination. The enemy charged, armored beasts with blades that could cut steel, insectoid swarms with acid spit, machines rolling on 6 legs mounted with cannons. The defenders braced, and Mara rose. She fired once, twice, each shot precise. But it wasn't just her aim. It was how she moved. She never wasted a step, never panicked. She read the battlefield like a book. When the insectoids tried to flank, she was already there. When the beasts leapt, she met them with a grenade that turned the ground into fire. The defenders shouted in awe. They had expected a long, painful end. Instead, they saw a single human stand unbroken. Her movements were fast, almost too fast for their eyes to follow, but it was her courage that struck them most. She didn't hide. She didn't step back. She advanced. The alien warlords on their ships grew uneasy. They had expected one human soldier to fall quickly. Instead, entire waves stalled. They saw their warriors hesitate, uncertain. Fear began to spread, not because Mara had destroyed armies, but because of what she represented. She was a human who did not retreat. And if one could fight like this, how many more were waiting back on Earth? As the battle stretched into night, the defenders realized they were no longer collapsing. For the first time in weeks, they were holding ground. Mara moved through their lines, giving quick orders, showing weak points in the enemy formation, guiding even the most inexperienced soldiers into strong positions. It was not just her skill. It was the way she lifted their spirit. By dawn, the enemy pulled back. Not far, but enough to give the defenders a moment to breathe. Mara stood at the front, her rifle low, her expression calm. The aliens around her stared in disbelief. One human had turned despair into hope. In the high chambers of the Galactic Council, reports began to flood in. Valus Prime still stood. A coalition attack had been stalled, not by a fleet, not by reinforcements, but by a single woman. Commanders debated. Some called it luck. Others called it myth. But those who had seen her with their own eyes knew the truth. This was no myth. This was human special forces, and while the galaxy debated her legend, the enemies who had faced her knew one thing. Fear had a human face now. The morning sun rose weakly over Valus Prime, its light struggling to cut through smoke that drifted across the battlefield. The defenders stood in silence, staring at the horizon where the enemy had pulled back during the night. They were tired, wounded and afraid, but for the first time in weeks there was something new in their eyes. Hope. And the source of that hope stood among them, calm and steady, checking her weapon and studying the terrain as if the battle had only begun. Captain Mara had slept for less than an hour, leaning against a shattered wall with her rifle across her knees. The alien soldiers around her whispered in awe, not daring to disturb her. To them, she was something they could not fully understand. She bled like them, moved like them, yet seemed to carry a presence far greater than any commander they had known. When she finally rose, every soldier followed her movements with quiet attention. Mara's gaze swept across the defenses, noticing weaknesses others had overlooked. She walked the lines, adjusting barricades, moving soldiers into better cover, and pointing out angles the enemy would likely exploit. Her words were calm and simple, yet carried a weight that made even the most nervous defenders straighten their backs. One young alien, barely old enough to hold a rifle, trembled as Mara passed. His four hands shook so badly he could not keep his weapon steady. Mara paused, crouched before him, and gently pressed her hand against the barrel until it lowered. "What is your name?" she asked. The soldier stammered. "J. Joran." Mara nodded. "Listen to me, Joran, you are not fighting alone. Look to your left, look to your right, they stand with you. Trust them, and they will trust you. That is how we survive." Joran blinked, then swallowed hard and nodded. For the first time since the invasion, his grip steadied. Mara gave him a small nod of approval before moving on. The moment was brief, but the effect spread. Soldiers who had seen her encouragement began to whisper it to others. Soon the entire line seemed stronger, more solid. High above, the enemy commanders studied the field through their scanners. The night's failure had unsettled them. One warlord, a hulking beast with horns curling from his skull, slammed a claw against the arm of his throne. "It makes no sense," he growled. "One human? One soldier turns my army aside?" Another commander hissed, her insect wings buzzing with irritation. "She is not an ordinary human. Their species calls them special forces." The horned warlord sneered. "Special or not, she is still flesh. We will crush her. Deploy the shredder beasts." The order rippled across the fleet. Soon the ground shook as massive cages were dropped onto the battlefield. With a screech of metal, the cages burst open, releasing creatures bred for war. They stood on 4 limbs, each twice the size of Mara, with jaws wide enough to snap steel. Their skin shimmered with natural armor, and their eyes glowed with hunger. Soldiers on the walls gasped in fear. These were shredder beasts, known for tearing apart entire squads within minutes. The beasts roared and charged. Soldiers gripped their weapons tighter, some already preparing to flee. Mara did not flinch. She stepped forward, rifle in hand, and gave a single command: hold the line. Her voice was steady, not loud, but it carried like thunder through the ranks. The defenders froze, then braced their positions. The beasts thundered closer, each step shaking the ground. Mara dropped to one knee, adjusted her scope, and fired. One beast staggered, a clean shot striking its eye. The others roared, rushing faster. Mara didn't panic. She shifted smoothly, firing again, then again. Each shot struck a weak point: joints, eyes, soft gaps in the armor. The defenders followed her lead, aiming where she aimed. Beasts that had once been thought invincible stumbled and fell under the storm of fire. Still, one broke through, leaping over the barricade with claws outstretched. Soldiers screamed, certain death had arrived, but Mara was already moving. She rolled beneath its swipe, drew her blade, and plunged it into the creature's throat. The beast collapsed with a choking roar, its massive body crashing at her feet. The defenders stared in shock. The beasts were supposed to be unstoppable, yet the human had cut one down as if it were no more than a wild animal. From their command ship, the enemy warlords grew uneasy. This is not possible," one whispered. "How does she know where to strike?" The insectoid commander clicked her mandibles. "It is not her weapons, it is her mind. She studies, she adapts, she learns faster than we can react." On the ground, Mara wiped the blade clean and looked toward the remaining beasts. Instead of fear, she saw hesitation in their eyes. Even creatures bred for war could sense danger. She raised her rifle slowly, and the beasts retreated a step. That single moment sent a chill across the battlefield. The invincible predators were afraid of one human. The enemy shifted tactics. Machines rolled forward, 6-legged tanks armed with plasma cannons. Their heavy armor gleamed under the sun, and their weapons hummed with deadly energy. The defenders braced, knowing their barricades would not withstand the assault. Mara scanned the machines, her eyes narrowing. She noticed their rhythm, the way the cannons rotated before firing, the vents that opened briefly after each shot. She turned to the soldiers beside her. "Target the vents when they glow," she instructed. The soldiers hesitated, but they trusted her. When the machines fired, Mara was already moving. She dashed from cover to cover, drawing their fire, her body moving with impossible speed and precision. Every time a vent glowed, she fired, her bullets slipping into weak points that most would never have noticed. Sparks flew, smoke poured out, and one by one the machines collapsed in flames. The defenders cheered, their voices rising like a storm. They no longer felt like prey, they felt like warriors, and it was because one human showed them how. Far above, the enemy warlord slammed his fist against the console. "She makes them stronger. They were broken before, and now they fight like wolves," the insectoid commander hissed softly. "This is why the galaxy fears them. A single human can change the course of a war." The warlord growled, but he did not answer. Deep inside, even he felt a twinge of unease. By evening, the battlefield was littered with the wreckage of machines and the bodies of beasts. The defenders stood victorious again, though exhausted. Mara walked among them, checking injuries, giving quiet encouragement, and ensuring the line was secure. She carried herself not like a hero demanding praise, but like a soldier making sure the job was done. When she passed Joran, the young alien soldier, he saluted awkwardly. His hands no longer trembled. Mara gave him a nod. "Well done." For Joran, those 2 words meant more than any medal. That night, around fires and dim lanterns, soldiers whispered her name with reverence. They told stories of how she moved, how she fought, how she seemed to know the battlefield better than the enemy themselves. Each retelling grew the legend. And across the stars, messages spread faster than light. Reports carried her deeds to distant worlds, where alien commanders shook their heads in disbelief. One human had turned the tide of battle, not with fleets or weapons of mass destruction, but with skill, courage, and the will to stand unbroken. The galaxy was beginning to understand what special forces truly meant. And deep in the enemy fleets, a new fear took root. The fear that if one human could do this, what would happen if an army of them arrived? The battlefield on Veles Prime grew quiet after the second day. Smoke still rose in the distance, but the enemy had pulled back again, unwilling to face the defenders directly. To the alien soldiers in the trenches, it felt like a miracle. They had survived 2 massive assaults, both of which should have crushed them. And at the center of it all was Captain Mara, the human who seemed unshakable. To the defenders, she was a hero. To the enemy, she was a nightmare. But to herself, she was just tired. Mara sat alone in the ruins of an old administration building, her helmet resting beside her. She had taken off her gloves, and her hands were raw from days of fighting. She poured a small ration of water over them, washing away dust and blood. For a long moment she stared at her reflection in the metal surface of her helmet. The face looking back was calm, but her eyes were heavy. She remembered the names of every soldier who had fallen in the last 2 days. She whispered them quietly, one by one. They were not human names, most difficult for her tongue to shape, but she made the effort. To her, they were not just numbers on a report. They were lives, and she carried them. Behind her, a soft voice broke the silence. "You should rest." Mara turned. It was Commander Threx, the scaled officer she had met on the first day. He looked weary, but less afraid than before. His eyes carried something new. Respect. "I'll rest when the civilians are safe," Mara replied simply. Threx hesitated. "The soldiers look to you as if you are more than human. Some say you cannot be defeated. They speak of you as if you are a weapon forged by Earth itself." Mara shook her head. "I'm no weapon, I'm just a soldier, and soldiers bleed like anyone else." But Threx saw the way she pressed her lips together, the way she hid her fatigue. She carried the burden quietly, but it was there, heavy on her shoulders. That night, the defenders gathered in small groups around fires. They ate rations, told stories, and for the first time since the invasion, they laughed. Mara walked among them, listening more than speaking. Soldiers stopped her often, some just to touch her arm, as if to make sure she was real. Others asked her questions about Earth, about humans, about how she learned to fight like she did. Mara answered patiently, but her words were always modest. One soldier, an elder with cracked armor, leaned close to her. "Why do you fight for us? We are not your people." Mara looked at him steadily. "Because no one deserves to be left behind, not humans, not you. If we don't stand together, none of us will survive what's coming." Her words spread quickly. The defenders began to repeat them, passing them like a chant across the camp. Mara hadn't meant for it to become a slogan, but it did. She had given them not just protection, but something greater, belief. Still, when the fires died down and the soldiers slept, Mara remained awake. She sat near the edge of the camp watching the stars. Somewhere out there, Earth spun quietly around its sun. Somewhere out there, other human special forces fought their own battles. She wondered how many of them carried the same weight she did. For all her courage on the battlefield, Mara's greatest fear was not the enemy. It was the galaxy itself, how much more it would demand of her kind once it realized the truth about humans. The next day, new orders came from the Galactic Council. Veles Prime's defense had caught their attention. Reinforcements would be delayed, but messages poured in from diplomats, leaders, even generals. They wanted Mara to stand before the council as a symbol of unity, a banner for the galaxy to rally around. When Threx delivered the message, Mara frowned. "They want a showpiece," she said. "They want hope. Threx corrected softly. Mara shook her head. Hope doesn't come from speeches. It comes from standing on the line side by side. If they want me in chambers, I'll disappoint them. I belong here. And she meant it. The thought of leaving the soldiers unsettled her. She could not stand. In a council hall while the people of Veles Prime still faced danger. To her, leadership meant being present, not being displayed. Later that afternoon, an alarm spread across the trenches. A civilian convoy was caught outside the perimeter, moving too slowly to escape the next enemy raid. Panic rippled through the defenders. They had little strength left, and sending soldiers out into the open would be a death sentence. Before anyone could give an order, Mara was already moving. She strapped on her helmet, checked her rifle, and sprinted toward the gates. Threx shouted after her, but she didn't slow down. The convoy needed her, and that was enough. The civilians were terrified, families with children, elders carrying what little they could. Enemy raiders closed in, fast and merciless. The civilians screamed as plasma fire tore through the air. But before it reached them, a single figure stepped into the line of fire. Mara. She moved with impossible precision, her body flowing from cover to cover, her rifle striking down enemies with each pull of the trigger. She placed herself between the convoy and the attackers, never retreating, never faltering. The civilians watched in shock as this lone human shielded them, her voice sharp and commanding. Keep moving, don't stop, I'll hold them off. Some of the alien families had grown up fearing humans, believing them reckless and brutal. But now, watching Mara throw herself between them and death, those stories shattered. They saw not a monster, not a conqueror, but a protector. When reinforcements finally arrived from the trenches, Mara had already broken the raiding force. The convoy reached safety and civilians gathered around her, tears in their eyes. A small alien child tugged at her sleeve, whispering in a trembling voice, "Thank you." Mara crouched down, placing a hand gently on the child's shoulder. "Stay safe," she said simply. That moment spread across Veles Prime faster than any battle story. To the civilians, she was not just a soldier. She was a guardian. To the soldiers, she was no longer just a commander. She was the reason they believed they could win. But to Mara, none of it mattered. She knew the truth. She was only one woman, carrying a burden far heavier than her shoulders could bear. She had no time for legends or symbols. Every day was about survival, about saving one more life. That night, as she sat alone again, Threx approached quietly. "They speak of you as if you are more than flesh," he said. Mara sighed. "I'm not. I'm just human. And maybe that's enough." Her words hung in the air, quiet, but firm. For all her doubts, for all the weight she carried, Captain Mara understood one thing. She could not stop. The galaxy might demand more of her. The Council might turn her into a symbol. But none of that mattered compared to the lives still at risk. She would keep standing. She would keep fighting, even if the burden never grew lighter. The stories of Captain Mara had spread far beyond Veles Prime. Every report, every whispered tale of her courage, moved through the galaxy like wildfire. Soldiers repeated her name with respect. Civilians prayed for her to appear on their world. Enemies cursed her in fear. And somewhere in the dark reaches of space, a warlord listened and grew angry. His name was Kael Vorak, a conqueror whose fleets had destroyed dozens of colonies. His enemies called him the Iron Fang, for he ruled through fear and strength. Entire worlds had bent their knees before him. He believed himself unstoppable, and for years no one had challenged that belief. But then came the stories of the human woman who defied armies. "She is just one soldier," Kael said, his voice echoing through the war chamber of his flagship. His commanders stood around him, shifting uneasily. "One soldier cannot change the galaxy. I will prove it." The insectoid commander who had fought Mara's forces before hesitated. "Warlord, she is not like others. Her presence turns soldiers into warriors. If she continues, even your enemies may rally under her." "Name?" Kale bared his fangs in a sharp smile. Then I will crush her name, bring her to me, set the trap. And so it began. A false message was sent, a desperate cry for help from a colony near the outer rim. The message spoke of civilians trapped, surrounded, begging for aid. Mara received it while still on Velas Prime. Threx, her ally and commander of the defense, read the report and frowned. It could be real, Threx warned. But it smells like bait. The warlords know who you are now. They would love to lure you away. Mara looked at the message again. She thought of the frightened faces she had seen in Velas Prime's shelters, of the children who had clung to their families in fear. If this message was true, if people were really trapped, she could not ignore it. Whether it is bait or not, she said quietly, I have to go. Threx placed a clawed hand on her shoulder. If you go, you may not return. Mara gave a thin smile. Then I'll make sure it's worth the risk. Within hours, she was gone. A single transport carried her into deep space, moving fast and silent. She didn't take squads or fleets. She knew the warlord wanted her, and she would not risk others in a trap meant for her. The colony was quiet when she arrived. Too quiet. Mara stepped onto the surface, her boots pressing against dust and ash. Buildings stood in ruins, fires still smoldering, but there were no screams, no movement, only silence. Then the sky darkened. Massive warships emerged from the clouds, their shadows swallowing the colony whole. From their bellies poured troops, hundreds then thousands, surrounding the settlement like a tide. At the center of it all, a towering figure descended on a platform of steel, Kale Vorak. He was enormous, his body covered in black armor, his horns sweeping back like blades. His eyes glowed with cruel amusement as he looked down at the lone figure waiting calmly in the ruins. So this is the human, Kale said, his voice booming across the battlefield. The galaxy trembles at the sight of you, but I see only flesh and bone. Mara raised her rifle slowly, meeting his gaze. Then step closer. You'll see more than you expect. Kyle laughed, the sound harsh and cold. He raised his claw, and the signal was given. His army advanced. The ground shook as warriors charged from all sides, weapons raised. Mara moved instantly, her body flowing with precision. She didn't retreat. She advanced. Her rifle sang, each shot finding its mark. Soldiers fell, one after another, but still more pressed forward. Mara rolled behind broken walls, set traps with grenades, and moved with impossible speed. To Kale's warriors, she seemed to be everywhere at once. Her calm expression never changed, even as the battlefield turned into chaos. Kale's commanders watched in disbelief. She fights like a storm, one whispered. She fights like a human, another corrected grimly. Still, the numbers were against her. Mara's lungs burned, her muscles ached, but she refused to stop. She remembered Joran, the young soldier she had encouraged. She remembered the convoy she had saved. She remembered the child who had whispered thank you. Those memories pushed her forward. Finally, Kale grew impatient. He leapt from his platform, landing heavily in the center of the battlefield. His warriors stepped back, giving him space. The warlord drew his massive blade, its edge glowing with energy. Enough games, Kale snarled. Face me, human. Mara stood tall, her rifle low but ready. She looked small compared to Kale's armored bulk, but her eyes burned with unshakable resolve. You think killing me will end this war, she said calmly, but it won't, because I'm not the reason your soldiers fear. They fear what I represent. They fear the truth, that humans don't run, even when the odds are impossible. Kyle roared and charged. His blade swept through the air, heavy, enough to crush steel. Mara dodged by inches, the energy burning across her armor. She fired, striking the gaps in his plates, but Kale pressed forward, relentless. The clash shook the ruins. Mara used every bit of her training, every instinct to stay alive. She darted between cover, struck at weak points, and used the environment against him. Explosions tore the ground, dust filled the air, and still she stood. Finally, Kale overextended. His blade slammed into a wall, embedding deep. Mara seized the moment. She dashed forward, pressing her rifle against his chest plate, and fired 3 times into the crack of his armor. Sparks burst, and Kale staggered back, roaring in pain. Looked down at the small human who had wounded him, disbelief etched across his monstrous face. "You should not be able to," he gasped. Mara lowered her rifle. Her voice was steady, quiet, but carried across the battlefield like a bell. "I don't need to defeat your empire. I only need to defeat you." The words cut deeper than any weapon. Kale's army froze, their faith shaken. Their warlord, their symbol of strength, staggered before a single human woman. Kale tried to rise again, but his strength faltered. Mara stood firm, watching him with eyes that carried no fear. To his soldiers, it was as if death itself had taken human form, and in that moment, the legend became truth. The Iron Fang, conqueror of worlds, fell to his knees before Captain Mara. His soldiers hesitated, then began to retreat, dragging him back toward the ships. The battlefield grew silent. Mara stood alone, her chest heaving, her armor scorched, but her eyes unbroken. She had walked into the heart of the trap and emerged, standing. Far above, across the stars, the story spread. The warlord who had once broken empires had been defeated, not by fleets, not by armies, but by a single human. The galaxy trembled, and in every corner, one truth echoed louder than before. Humans were not to be underestimated. The battlefield was still when dawn touched the horizon. Smoke rose from shattered walls, and the ruins of the colony were littered with broken weapons and burned machines. Yet among the silence stood Captain Mara, her rifle at her side, her armor cracked but her stance unbroken. The warlord Kyle Vorik had been carried away by his retreating soldiers, his strength broken and his pride shattered. His armies fled with him, abandoning the field. To the defenders who arrived too late to join the fight, the scene was impossible to believe. One woman had stood against a force meant to crush entire worlds, and she had endured. Word spread fast. By the time Mara returned to Velis Prime, the news had already reached the Galactic Council. Reports called her the Shield of Velis, the Breaker of the Iron Fang, the Unshakable Human. In the Council's chambers, alien leaders argued over her name, debating how to use her story. Some wanted to raise her as a symbol of resistance, to broadcast her image across the stars. Others whispered in fear, wondering what humanity was truly capable of if one of their soldiers could humble a warlord. But Mara herself wanted none of it. When she stepped off her transport back at Velis Prime, soldiers rushed forward to cheer. Civilians held banners and flowers calling out her name. She nodded politely, gave them a small wave, but her eyes searched instead for the wounded, for the ones who needed help. She didn't see herself as a hero. She saw herself as someone who had survived, and who had a duty to keep others alive. Commander Threx found her in the middle of the celebration, standing quietly as others shouted praise. "You should be in the council chambers by now," Threx said. "They will want to honor you with medals, titles, even a seat among their leaders." Mara shook her head. "I'm not a leader. I'm a soldier. I belong here, not in some hall filled with speeches." Threx studied her for a long moment. "You may not want the legend, but it is already out there. Your name carries more weight than any fleet. Even Kale Vorik's soldiers whisper of you now. You've become something larger than yourself." Mara looked away, her jaw tightening. She didn't want to be larger than herself. She wanted to remain human, flesh and bone, not an untouchable myth. But she also knew she couldn't control how the galaxy would remember her. That night she walked the camp as she always did. She checked on soldiers, patched wounds, and listened to stories around fires. Joran, the young soldier she had once encouraged, proudly showed her a small badge he had carved from scrap metal. It was shaped like a shield. "I made this because of you," he said, his voice steady now, no longer trembling. "When I was afraid, I remembered your words. I remembered that we don't fight alone." Mara gave him a small smile. "Keep it, not for me, for yourself. Because you were the one who stood when it mattered. Joran bowed his head, clutching the badge tightly. Moments like that mattered more to Mara than any speech in the council. She knew she had given others strength, but she also knew she had to remind them that the strength was always their own. She was just the spark. Across the galaxy, the spark became a flame. Soldiers on distant worlds began to repeat the story of the human woman who had defied the Iron Fang. Civilians painted her likeness on walls. Children acted out her battles in play, pretending to hold rifles and stand unbroken against invisible armies. Even among her enemies, whispers grew, some of fear, others of reluctant respect. In one conquered world, alien workers spoke quietly in the dark. If one human can break Kael Vorak, then maybe one day we too can be free. The council sent more messages begging her to appear, to let them use her face to rally allies. She ignored most of them. Instead, she trained with her unit, taught alien recruits how to fight with discipline, and walked with the wounded who struggled to find courage again. But legends are not bound by the wishes of the ones who carry them. Merchant ship arrived one morning at Velis Prime carrying goods and supplies. The crew recognized her instantly and bowed their heads as she passed. "You don't know us," one of them said, "but we know you. Whole systems know you. They tell your story everywhere." Mara gave them a polite nod, but when she walked away, she felt the weight of those words. Whole systems knew her. She had never wanted fame. She had only wanted to protect. Later, Threx found her again. "You can't stop the story," he told her gently. "But you can guide it. If you let others see you as flesh, not as a god, they will remember that strength is possible for all of them, not just for one human." Mara considered his words. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps her role was not just to fight, but to show others that they too could stand, not by being untouchable, but by being human. The war was far from over. Kael Vorak still lived, though his pride was broken. Other warlords gathered, frightened, but desperate. Yet wherever their fleets turned, they carried the memory of the human who had stood against them. Even if they won battles, they feared that another Mara might appear, and that fear alone weakened them. For Mara, nothing changed. She rose each morning, checked her rifle, and walked with her soldiers. She still whispered the names of the fallen. She still carried the burden quietly. She never sought thrones, never asked for parades. She remained what she had always been, a soldier of humanity, standing where others might fall. And so her story grew, not because she demanded it, but because others needed it. On Velis Prime, children who had once cowered in shelters now carved wooden figures of her. On distant worlds, soldiers painted her symbol on their armor. On enemy ships, warriors hesitated, remembering how their warlord had fallen to her. She became a legend that walked, not distant, not untouchable, but real. A legend with calloused hands, with weary eyes, with a heart that beat not for glory, but for those she protected. The galaxy would forever remember her as the human who defied fear. And for Mara, that was enough.